So, welcome to our How to Overcome Resistance to Change webinar. I want to start off first of all by getting you straight involved and asking you a question. What is your reaction when you hear about a major change that is going to have a direct impact on you or your colleagues? Which of those words that are up on screen now actually feel kind of, resonate with you in your own response to a major change? If you just want to pop your answer in chat for me, that would be wonderful. Curious. Excited and curious. Depending on what it is, there can be overwhelmingness, yeah. Enthusiastic generally. If it's imminent, anger, fear, worry, anxiety. If it's in the future, curious. Yeah, absolutely. Worry. Yeah. Yeah. And just kind of, in a way, because of the roles that most of you that are here tend to kind of hold, I would expect that, there is more of that kind of excitement, optimism, curiosity, etc. But it was interesting to see that for some of you as well, there's that little bit of kind of, it could be overwhelming depending what it is. There could be that fear, that worry, that anxiety also associated with it. And thinking about your colleagues that you work with, when they hear about change, we tend to hear a lot more about that kind of worry, anxiety, overwhelm, fatigue coming through. I know organisations that I have worked directly with, then when I'm talking to the frontline staff, it's all about things being done to them. It's worrying. There's so much uncertainty around. At best, they're ambivalent. One or two may be a little bit more curious about it, but overwhelmingly there's that kind of anger, fear, worry, why do we need it kind of situation. So something else for you to think of: which of the following are important to you, reasons why you kind of here today, shall we say? Is it about ways of engaging and involving team members? Is it more about understanding the needs of team members during the project? Is it about communicating change effectively or preparing for change? Where's your kind of interest lie? So if we just number them 1, 2, 3, 4 as they kind of appear on screen from the top: ways of engaging 1, preparing for change 4. If you just, again, pop answers into chat, so you can just put the number if you want, 1, 2, 3 or 4, or a combination of the points that you are particularly kind of more interested in. All of them. 4, yeah. 1 and 2, yeah. Okay, so a good kind of range and spread. And the good news, of course, is, guess what? We're going to be covering them anyway in the course of today. So as usual, we'll be breaking it down into 3 chapters today. Chapter 1, why is change so hard? So we're going to be looking at some of the science to gain insights into why many people don't like change and resist change. Chapter 2 is going to be more around understanding reactions, needs of team members, how the behavioural preferences can help us to anticipate individuals' reactions and ways of responding to their reactions. And chapter 3, we're going to be looking at what we can do to lead successful change initiatives. So how we can set change up to succeed, and look at some of the tools and strategies that support people to get the best outcomes when implementing change initiatives. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan, founding partner of Jigsaw Discovery and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery tool. My background started off in the hospitality sector, operational leadership positions, etc., before moving into learning development 23 years or so ago now. Kind of since moving into learning development for the last 23 years, very much been involved in behaviours, I've got a background in psychology, and for the last 13 years now have been studying neuroscience. So, why is change so hard? So, again, in chat, please, what have you noticed about the pace of change over the last 20 years? Much more frequent, a lot quicker. You did it last week. Faster, more common. Yeah, the VUCA world. Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important just to put change into context in these days. And that's why I asked that question, you know, what have we actually noticed about change? And it is all about the speed of change. And really, since the turn of the millennium, and then there was a subsequent global financial crisis, there's no doubting that the pace of change is accelerated and continues to accelerate, because we're living in this world where there is that greater uncertainty, ambiguity and complexity. And technology, which was once thought to be the answer to the world's problems, has shown that as great as it is, on its own, it's not going to be the solution to everything. Many organisations have faced unexpected competition from new products, new services. Just think back to how businesses pivoted during the pandemic as a means of surviving, bringing new products and services onto the market. And all that meant that in order to just survive, other organisations had to really look at how they could up their game. And sadly, as we've seen over the last few years, many didn't survive. And we have seen really big named companies disappearing. So all of this has meant that dramatic change, really, in the way that work is organised, new skills are required, so changing skills, new communication channels are needed. Even the way that our organisations are structured, the hierarchical structures tend to be much flatter than they were at the end of the last century, for example. And all this is affecting our people. As far back as 2013-14, researchers were predicting the need for high-level change management skills in the future was going to be great. And even despite that, change management skills remain among the weakest of leadership competencies, with around 70% of change initiatives failing. Now, a lady called Linda Ray from an organisation called Neuro Capability in Australia, she actually suggests that the figure could be even higher if we were to include the number of change initiatives which fail to be even launched, despite there being a need for the change. They just don't get round to being launched. So again, a question for you to ponder on and answers in chat. Why do change initiatives have such a poor track record? Thoughts in chat, please. Lack of understanding? Yeah, it's done to people rather than with them. The why is not sold, yeah. Communication and drive to those that will operate change is done too late. Disillusionment, here we go again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to share with you a few of my kind of thoughts and thoughts of some of the researchers into why change has such a poor track record. The first thing is that many change initiatives fail to take into account the complexity of the work and the world in which we're living in. Also, many of the change models used, such as Kotter's 8-step process, dates back to the 1990s, before the emergence of neuroscience. I've already mentioned about the low levels of change management competencies amongst leaders. And an awful lot of them fail down to the lack of understanding that we as individuals, as humans have, as leaders have, of how the brain drives behaviour. And that is one of the most important things now, is for leaders to understand more about the brain and how they can leverage the work with the brain rather than against it. Because an awful lot of our management processes and systems and change management processes and systems are outdated, and they actually work against the brain instead of working with the brain. So just want to take a brief look at some kind of key information that we all, everybody, should be aware of about our brain. So the primary purpose of the brain is survival, to keep us safe. And it does that by constantly scanning the environment. Right now, wherever you are sitting, your brain, unconscious to you, you're not aware of it, is scanning your environment all the time, looking for those potential kind of threats. And part of that then, that information is then processed, and the brain is then predicting the potential outcome of your current situation, which helps to create the certainty then that the brain actually craves. And it's all about minimizing threats and potential threats and risk so that we can actually avoid threat to keep us safe. And the last kind of key function that we should all be aware of is the brain is programmed to conserve energy. The brain wants us to be always prepared should we need to fight or flight. Therefore, it will not waste energy unless the brain believes that the reward is sufficient. And I'll just explain that a little bit more in a second. So, when we're confronted with a change, our brains automatically calculate the potential risk and the potential reward. If the perceived reward is less than the perceived risk to that individual, then no action will be taken. So in other words, inaction or resistance will be the behaviours that we see in that individual. So what is it then that is motivating the brain to take no action? What's the motivation for the brain? Why does it do that, do you think, based on what we've just talked about with the brain? Any thoughts? Answers in chat. Why does our brain weigh up the risk and the reward? And if the reward is not greater than the risk, then it won't take any action. Conserving energy. Yeah, absolutely right, Anne-Marie. Conserving energy. It's all about avoiding that threat and conserving our energy in case we need that fight or flight. So making change actually involves several brain regions, which helps to explain why change can be so hard. Now, I'm just very quickly going to go through these brain regions. First of all, our prefrontal cortex. So that's our cognitive, logical, rational, problem-solving part of the brain. The role of the PFC, as we call it, the prefrontal cortex, is to weigh up all the incoming data that's coming from various different sources. First of all, our amygdala. That registers the emotions that we're feeling when we think about change and how it might impact us in the future. Another part of the brain, called the basal ganglia, brings up all the memories associated with the way we've always done things, our habits and our routines. So that information is being brought up, the way we've always done things, the safe ways, the certain ways. A part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, detects any conflict concerning the change and supports our focused attention, which then helps us to make the change, because we need that focused attention to help us develop the new behaviours, the new habits for the change to be effective, to be long lasting. Part of the brain called the dorsal lateral PFC, prefrontal cortex, is active because that is where all our short-term, the data that's in our short-term memory is being held. The hippocampus also plays a role. The hippocampus is an important part of the brain in relation to learning. So the hippocampus helps us to commit the new memories, the new behaviours, the new ways of doing things. It helps to commit that into our longer term memory so that it becomes the way that we do things. So again, a very important stage or a very important part of the brain that we need to be aware of and think about. How are our actions and behaviours as leaders, the things that we're saying and doing, how are they all activating the right parts of the brain to get the right outcomes that we're looking for? So clearly an awful lot goes on in change, and so no wonder our brains are always trying to kind of maintain that status quo. The brain is a highly connected organ, and it's really important to understand that no one area of the brain is responsible for change. For change to take place and be effective, it relies on all our areas in the brain working in concert together. And they'll either do that and reject the change, or will do that and accept the change. And again, it comes down to that risk versus reward, how it's perceived by the brain. A researcher called Robert Snyder, he poses a great question. I'm going to share this question with you and get you to reflect on it to help us understand the challenges leaders can face in leading change. So he says, what happens if your boss came to you and said, I'm going to ask you to take on a very challenging, large-scale project, or change project, as should have said. It will require a ton of extra work over a long period of time. It will most likely be emotionally draining, if not outright exhausting. For years, you won't be sure how the project's going to even turn out. You'll be on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it's unavoidable that you're going to get called into work in the middle of the night. There'll be many unknowns, but it is certain that you'll have to acquire new skills that might be difficult for you to master. Scheduling is going to be complex, and increased short distance travel is going to be involved. You'll have to complete tasks repeatedly that many other people would find unsavoury. Your patience is going to be tested on nearly a daily basis. Oh, and by the way, your pay won't increase. In fact, your discretionary income will be reduced substantially. Now, whilst we might not all be leading large-scale organisational change products, many of the change initiatives that you are involved with and your leaders would be involved with would include elements of Snyder's List. So, quick question, yes or no, would you want that job? In chat, please, yes or no? No. That was a very quick response, that, Renata. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't, would we? But yet, that is what is often involved in change from a leader's perspective. So, challenges. There are numerous challenges to facilitating change, and we don't have time to go into them all today. But here's just a few that we need to be aware of. First of all, our belief systems. We have an innate need to maintain or enhance our view of ourselves. The brain is particularly sensitive to situations which potentially threaten our self-image. So if you've attended previous webinars, you'll have heard me talk about either the scare or the scarf model. They're both the same model, just slightly different words. And self-image is linked to that significance or status domain in those models. Our once established our belief systems are self-validating. They go in search of data to validate that our beliefs are correct. And once we get into that and they're established and self-validating, then they are very, very hard to change. The second challenge, something known as biased choice value. The choices we make are likely to be biased by our past experiences and the values that we place upon the alternative options that's available at that moment. So if we have previously been involved with a change that from our perspective, I'm not saying the change was actually successful in actually achieving what it was set out to, but if it's been successful from the individual's perspective, then their brain will have automatically attached positive outcomes to it. So whenever any future change comes up, however they responded to past change, their brain will be pushing them, motivating them, driving them to take similar action again, even if there are other options out there that actually, do make sense. There is some alternative out there and there is evidence pointing to the alternatives, but the brain is more likely to go for past experience because that creates certainty. And again, certainty is something that the brain craves. We've also got to remember that, when people are stressed, and let's face it, as many people are during ongoing change, even though they may be trying hard to focus on the change, in reality, they're often most likely to revert back to old ways because the brain is just so overwhelmed. It's really struggling and it doesn't have the energy to suppress all the old habits and the old ways of doing things. It takes an awful lot of energy to remember to do things the new way, to do things differently. And if our brain is overwhelmed and fatigued and stressed, then it just doesn't have the energy available to do that suppression. Cognitive dissidence is another reason, another challenge when we're thinking about change. And this occurs when there's conflicting or inconsistent data. For example, when an individual's behaviour isn't consistent with their thoughts and beliefs. So for change to take place, individuals must be able to commit to the new way of doing something and also be motivated towards the new thinking and the goals. That will then lead new attitudes being formed, and when new attitudes are formed and aligned to the change is more likely to be successful in the long term. Now, there's many reasons why people refuse to change behaviour, even when it can be viewed as being desirable. One example of this is a threat may have been experienced in one, more, or all even of the scare, scarf social domains. So, for example, if people haven't been given the opportunity to draw their own conclusions, if they've just been informed that this change is a good thing, they haven't been given the kind of the flip side of that, the downside as well as the positives, then in actual fact, that's created a threat, an autonomy threat on their scare domains. Or the other thing that can get in the way, a challenge that we need to be aware of, is if an individual is already experiencing stress and cognitive overload, then they may be struggling to make rational decisions and choices. There's something called the protective versus productive mode. Now, it's perfectly understandable when, given all of the uncertainty and challenges associated with change, that previously high-performing individuals or even whole teams can move into a state of threat. And when we move into that threat state, we focus upon keeping safe. We keep our heads down. We become hyper-vigilant to risk, less innovative. We move to that kind of black or white, either or type thinking. We move into what is known as the protective mode. And when we're in protective mode, we make decisions based on our past experiences. We're more likely to feel that we don't matter, especially when we don't have a say in the change. We look for evidence to confirm our beliefs that change is bad. And we will definitely be experiencing threat in probably all 5 of those scare scarf domains. So significance, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and equity. So it means that we lose that motivation and we end up just doing the bare minimum required of us. Now, it's also important to remember or to be aware that we experience change in different ways and we all find different things stressful. And some people may already be at that maximum cognitive load before they even get to work and have to cope with the change. You know, just taking into account the things like the cost of living crisis, caring for loved ones, relationship issues. These are all things that for some people can create that absolute maximum cognitive overload. So this means we should really think about the protective and productive modes as a continuum, with people being at different stages, different places on that continuum. So when a change is first announced, it's really natural, as we've said, to see a shift towards protective mode, even in teams who have been previously highly productive teams. Now, the degree of longevity of that shift will be influenced by several factors that are within the control of our leaders. Just some of those things. First of all, psychological safety. How safe do team members actually feel? How psychologically safe is your organisation? The individual's appetite and capacity for change, which relates back to all those things I've been talking about, the cognitive overload. What else is going on for the individual in their life? And the triggering of that threat reward response in the scare domains. Are people experiencing more threats than rewards? The last challenge we'll mention today is when too much change is expected in too short a time scale, which leads to overwhelm. So the brain's a very powerful organ that can be likened to a smartphone. If you've got too many apps open on your smartphone, the energy drains very quickly. You quickly end up with a flat battery. And the brain is the same. When presented with too much information, too much change in too short a time, then information overload occurs. Change fatigue can set in. The brain can only process and focus attention on 2 to 3 pieces of information at any one time. So to minimise this, it's important that we focus on small chunks of change. That way, we're actually working in line with the workings of the brain. We're working within the capacity of the brain. We're minimising that risk of fatigue and overwhelm. And ideally, what we should be doing is breaking the change down into chunks, which can be accomplished within 90 days, or 91 days is the actual, because that's exactly a quarter of a year. So 91 days. So rather than announcing huge change initiatives, they need to be broken down into smaller chunks if we want to make them more manageable, more successful. So an awful lot of information there. Just going to give you just literally a minute just for a little bit of quiet kind of time reflection. And if you just maybe want to pop any thoughts that you've got, any kind of key takeaways or anything from that section, just pop it into chat. So hopefully, yeah. I was certainly looking into the scare and scarf model. Yeah, Alan, I got loads of information. If you want to, I'll drop you something off later, drop you a line. Change leader to focus on people more. Absolutely. Our poor brains, we are certainly asking a lot of them. Absolutely. The hardest part for me is dealing with people in very senior roles who think they behave in psychological safe ways but don't. Yeah, and that impacts on the change fundamentally. Absolutely, Renata. Okay, some interesting research actually says that if we ask the majority of people, or when asked, the majority of people would say that they are very self-aware or self-aware. Research has shown that only 15% of the population are truly self-aware. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have when people who are in senior positions do believe in this psychological safety. You know, they believe they're acting in psychologically safe ways. And this is where an awful lot of the brain science, the SCARF model, SCARE model, is coming in to its being kind of thing. And we're finding that if we can get, and it's not, again, not all senior leaders are going to take this on board, but there's an awful big shift towards introducing into our leadership development programs more and more of the brain science, the SCARE model, SCARF model, for example, those key kind of things that I said about how the brain works. It is vital, and this is all part of that kind of the change in the new skills that we need, the change in the learning that we need going forward. Okay, so we'll move on to chapter 2 now. Team members' needs and reactions. So in this one, we're going to look at individual behavioural preferences, the qualities, how they can provide insights into how an individual may react in the face of change, and some of the things that we may be able to do to help and support them during change. Looking down the list, you can see that several of you are already very familiar with the Jigsaw Discovery framework. But for those of you who are not, the Jigsaw Discovery behavioural profile and framework is actually, it looks at, we have 4 behavioural preferences. Our red style, we actually have character names ever ready, we call them, is all about achievement, success, direct, blunt speaking, focus driven, competitive, strategic thinkers. Our yellow style, Ray of Sunshine, is all about enjoyment, novelty, great ideas, great starters, great creative thinkers, enthusiastic problem solvers. Our green, Carey, is all about caring, protecting, helping, supporting other people, team players, great listeners, considerate, always put people before task, compassionate and empathetic. And our last behavioural preference is our blue, Mr. Huey Blue, we affectionately call him, who maintains order and correctness. It's all about routines, structures, does things by the book, the right way. There's a right way or a wrong way, no midway. It's all about detail, systematic processing, and a little bit risk averse. So that's a very quick overview of those 4 behavioural preferences that we are all a mix of. All 4. So the Jigsaw behavioural framework is based upon 3 axes: introversion, extroversion, thinking, feeling, sensing and intuition. I just want to look at these different axes in turn. During change, an individual's preference on the introvert extrovert axes will influence how they want to receive and process information. So both introverts and extroverts want information, but they want it in different forms. So an introvert, they like written information before a meeting so that they've got time to prepare, to read it through, to digest it, to think it through. They don't like being put on the spot, so they like to be prepared. They like that time to reflect and think things through. They like to be asked what they think and have their concerns and ideas heard. And we need to remember that introverts need to think to speak and think to act. Think first is the way of the introvert. Extroverts, they much prefer verbal, in-person communication. They talk to think. So the first thing an extrovert says is not necessarily the best idea, the best thing they're going to say. We need to encourage them to talk and keep talking, because their ideas, as they're talking, they're thinking through and expanding and building on, developing their ideas. They need to be involved. They need to be kept close to the energy for the project. They like to have the attention of other people so that they can voice and share their ideas and opinions with other people. And they are doers. They prefer to do rather than think. They like to get on with it and keep that enthusiasm for the project alive and keep the project moving. So that's our introversion and extroversion. Next, we look at the combination of the thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition axes and how that influences an individual's needs. Thinking and feeling axes influences the criteria upon which the individual rejects or supports a change. And it also is about how they're going to focus during the change, where their focus will be. Sensing intuition influences the type of information individuals need and the likely questions that they're going to want answering. So let's just look at each one in turn. An intuitive thinker then. This is equates to what we call the red, the ever ready. So the key needs of a person with this intuitive thinking preference, they need to know the why. They want the logic, the thinking behind the change, clear goals and outcomes. They want managers and the change leaders to be able to demonstrate their competency by getting that change completed. They want to see it moving. They want the big detail, the overall plan and direction. They want to be able to add their own ideas and their own ways of doing things in there. They want to get involved, perhaps delegate a part of the project to them, get them involved that way, give them the kind of authority and some autonomy, responsibility to get on with it, because completion and achievement is very important to them. If we look at our intuitive feeling preference, our yellow, ray of sunshine, they need the biggest possible picture, painted big and bold. They need that vision. They need the consideration, to know that consideration is being given to the way the changes will affect people. They want about the possibilities and the opportunities that are going to open up. They need an opportunity again to share their ideas and build upon the vision. They need to be involved, kept close to the change. They need recognition for their ideas, and they want it to be a pleasant experience. Moving on to our sensing feeling. So this is in jigsaw terms, our green carers. Their key needs. They like to know what is wrong with the current way that we are doing things. What's wrong with the way people are doing things? Why is this change needed in terms of the people? They want to know about the who, the what, the when and the where through the lens of people. They want information on how it's going to affect people, their colleagues, their customers, and how the change leader plans to meet people's needs. They need clear guidelines and expectations about roles and responsibilities. They need to feel valued and appreciated. and they need reassurance during the change. The blue are Mr. Huey Blue, sensing thinking. They need realistic information about the change and the future, the pros and the cons. They need to know why the change is necessary. What is wrong with the way, the process, the how that they're doing it now. They want clear timelines, guidelines. They want the specifics of the what, when, how, why, and who. They want to know the benefits and the drawback, the pros and the cons, the logic behind the change. They want a realistic plan for implementation of the change. And they expect that managers, the change leaders, can demonstrate their competency and be knowledgeable about the change. So that's how our behavioural preferences can influence the things that we need in change. So they inform about how we want to be informed, the kind of information we want, and the criteria that we are actually going to make the decision of whether or not we're going to be support or resist the change, how we want to be involved, how we want change plans to be structured. So managing change, take responsibility first of all for yourself. What specific actions do you actually need to make sure you get the right type of information that you need so you can get behind the change? Especially if you're a team manager, team leader. Then we need to focus on the needs of the team, such as we've already just been speaking about. And then lastly, it's okay having the awareness of the needs of the teams, but we need to take action. How are we going to support them? What are we going to do? So a few ideas that you could try. For the reds, provide them with an overall plan and the outcomes, big picture, invite them to critique the plan. With the yellows, talk about the vision, again, the big picture, clarify and focusing on those potential opportunities, possibilities for team members, for customers. For the green, give specific people-focused information. What is not working? How will the changes improve the situation? Clarify how the needs of people during the change will be addressed. And our blues, Mr. Huey Blue, provide explicit information, details of the how, when, and who. Give information about the alternatives considered. Discuss the pros and cons. So you'll also need to remember, take into account the introversion, extroversion. How are you actually going to communicate this? In person, written, combination of the two, large groups, one-to-one, all those things need thinking through. So, the reinforcement sensitivity theory. I just want to touch on this. This was a theory put together originally, Gray and McNaughton, and they suggest that individual differences in personality and behaviour are explained by the sensitivity of the individual to reward and punishment and their associated tendency to either approach a situation or avoid a situation. So this theory has got real kind of implications for how we understand differences in an individual's comfort with change and what motivates people to pursue goals. So what the theory actually says is it refers to the degree to which people are likely to either approach the situation because they see it as approaching reward, because they have an approach orientation to change, and that's usually linked with personality traits around optimism and impulsiveness. Or it's about the degree to which they're likely to avoid situations of uncertainty and role conflict, especially where self-worth is possibly threatened. And it also refers to the degree to which an individual responds to high levels of immediate threat by means of fighting back, as in fight, and the degree of the response of an individual to less immediate threat by flight or freezing. Now, in general terms, humans tend to respond to high levels of immediate threat by fighting back, and will tend to respond to less immediate threat by fleeing or freezing. And what the reinforcement sensitivity theory suggests is that individuals with high optimism and reward orientation are more likely to actively embrace change, while those who easily react to unpleasant, unwanted situations will more easily recognise the threat of not changing and want to flee towards a safer option. A gentleman called Martin Turnbull, a researcher, 2015, in his paper, A Model of Motivation for Facilitating Sustainable Change, identified 4 change personality types. So what we've actually done, we've taken Turnbull's 4 types and overlaid them with the Jigsaw framework. Now, it's not a perfect fit, but it does actually help, and they kind of complement one another, shall I say. So category A, as Turnbull calls it, are people who naturally demonstrate an approach personality trait. However, what we find is in category A, although the person has got an approach natural kind of trait, they're not on board necessarily with the change. And when they're in that position, then they basically make a noise. They let it be known. They vocalize their opposition to change. And they'll even go as far as openly criticizing and undermining a change strategy. If they don't see any reward in changing, or if the change is insufficient from their perspective, then they will fight to maintain the way things are. They'll fight for the status quo. So people falling into this category need convincing through messages framed with positive approach language to activate that approach action towards accepting the change. Statements that affirm people's significance can be really helpful here. Whilst we often think about people with a high red behavioural preference as being the drivers of change, what I particularly like about this model is, on Turnbull's model, is that we can hear it gives us an opportunity to consider if the red preference isn't on board with the change, if they're not in the driving seat of the change, if it's not aligned to their own priorities and goals, etc., then the red is likely to display these category A behaviours. So how can we what can we say to these people? Here's an example from Turnbull. He suggests using statements similar to the ones that's on screen. So we can see there red language in there, the use of words such as competitive, outcomes aligned to the red behavioural preference. We can also see how Turnbull creates a reward in the significance or status domain by talking about being a key player, a valuable employee, their support being essential. So moving on to category B people. People who demonstrate avoidance personality traits may, when change is taking place, experience fear when they're initially faced with the change. That can lead to anxiety and internal conflict because of the uncertainty that it is all resulting in. And that will hold them back from getting on board with the change. So here, in this instance, Turnbull suggests tapping into their innate pessimistic outlook by creating motivating messages using avoidance framed language, which supports this group to see that actually not changing is clearly a greater threat than the change itself. Also, it's quite useful to think about using statements that will address and acknowledge the uncertainty and anxiety. So again, there's a couple of different statements I'll show you here. I'll give you the one on screen at the moment. And the second statement I'm going to show you addresses or helps to address that anxiety and the uncertainty. Okay. So category C people. These are people who demonstrate approach traits and embrace change. They'll actively go out and seek change and how they can get involved in supporting it. So they're unlikely to pose any real significant challenge during the change process. So this is a group we can tap into as potential change champions, really, who might be able to kind of influence other people, perhaps the people that are sitting on the fence and not fully committed to the change. So here again, Turnbull suggests something fairly straightforward, as we can see on screen. Again, talking about in yellow language, the opportunities, and that we'd welcome their input, their support, their ideas in how we can bring others along on this change initiative, very much playing into the ray of sunshine, the yellow language. So lastly, our category D, people who demonstrate avoidance traits, but actually recognise that there is a need for change. Now, they will tend to be easily motivated by aversive stimuli and more quickly see the threat of maintaining the status quo. They'll still feel uneasy about the change, even though they understand the need for change. And we need to provide reassurance to this group throughout the process, letting them know that it's still worth investing the effort in. Remember, the brain and the effort, unless the reward is great enough, it won't actually go along with the change. So here again, Turnbull suggests that the reassurance of kind of suggesting those regular check-ins. We can also see examples of green preference language, acknowledging their concerns, encouraging them to raise concerns in the future, expression of appreciation. So the important insight really of this theory is that there is a strong relationship between motivating actions and innate traits everyone demonstrates when experiencing change. So the next time you want to bang your head against the wall, having to deal with someone who is resisting change, remember the reaction is just a natural way they react to change. They're not just being difficult, honestly, to make your life hard. Quickly, we'll go into chapter 3 now and go through some of the strategies. I appreciate that we're just coming up to time. And please, if you need to leave, that's absolutely fine. I understand that, that's fine. But we'll just be about another 10 minutes, I guess. So in this chapter, we're going to look at some of the brain-based strategies that support successful outcomes. So these are some of the new, let's call it the new approaches to managing change. And again, I've only been able to focus on, I think there's 4 different strategies here. But there's many, many more that we could be focusing on. So you'll notice on the slide, change happens. We've removed the not to me. because this is how we can bring people on board. So the first model is what was known as the steering model. And this was developed by Linda Ray and Bromie Coombs in 2019. And it very much is designed to work aligned to the brain, the workings of the brain. And it can be used to support leaders in navigating the change process. So the first component is strategy. And we need to start out by answering that fundamental question that somebody actually put earlier into chat, that question of why. The why behind the change. Anchoring people in the why helps to create the certainty that is needed by the brain. And it helps people to understand the potential impact of the change. Understanding how the work that they will do is going to contribute to the greater good of the team, the organisation, or even the world. And that's one of the ingredients that was identified in the Google Aristotle project as being required for high-performing teams. Knowing how what I'm doing day in, day out is contributing to the greater good of the team, the organisation, or possibly the world. Talent. Do you have the right mix of people involved? Who are the best people placed to influence others? And that's not always the leaders, remember. Who are the key influencers in your teams, in your organisations? Because when we get the right people involved, then the needs of significance, autonomy and equity are rewarded. Engagement. How will we support people through the change process? How can we collectively influence the change process? And how are we going to guard against change fatigue? All things that we need to be considering before we start going through this process. Adaptability. One of the reasons we said that change initiatives often fail is they don't take into account the current context of the world. That fast pace, the uncertainty that's out there, the complexity, the volatility, things are changing day by day, even hour by hour sometimes. So the steer model actually reminds us that we need to be mindful of the context and consider how will we adapt our plans, our strategy, our processes to the changing circumstances. Because if this is a fairly big change process that's going to go on for a while, certainly things will have changed. How will we adapt with those changes? And what are the signals that we need to look for, to be aware of, that indicate that perhaps we need to start to make some adjustments? Lastly, the roadmap. People need to have clarity of the road ahead. They need to understand their role in change and what's expected of them. Now, clarity was another one of those key ingredients of high-performing teams in the Google Aristotle project. Because creating clarity also helps to meet our need for certainty. And when we understand how we are contributing, then our need for significance is rewarded. And when we understand what is expected of us and how the work is allocated, it can actually meet our need for equity and fairness. Just having a strategy is not enough. What we mean by a roadmap is that everybody, from the very top to the very bottom of any organisational structure, needs to know what they need to do each day to support the change initiative. They need to know the tasks, the behaviours that they need to do each and every day. Pick 3. This is one of Snyder's suggestions, actually. And he suggested that a large percentage of people believe that they are consistent in behaviour. However, evidence suggests that this is not true. And leaders have a huge influence over success, or otherwise actually, of a change initiative. So Snyder actually suggested that the importance of leaders being consistent and demonstrating the behaviours which support the success of the change, the behaviours they're wishing to see in others as well, is very, very important. So Snyder suggested a very simple strategy that works with the brain. So what we do is, first of all, we should select 3 behaviours that we would like to develop. So these are behaviours that are consistent to the change that we're expecting to see and make within our organisation. For example, you may want to take more time to step back and reflect before reacting, for example. What you do is then write those 3 behavioural goals on something like an index card, and put that index card in an obvious place in your workspace, somewhere that you will see it at the beginning and end of each day. Then each morning when you go into work, the first thing you do is pick up the index card and read the behaviours, and just reflect, and I mean no more than a few seconds, reflect on what does that actually mean? How am I going to actually display those behaviours? Because what we're doing there is we're priming the brain to be aware of when you demonstrate these behaviours through the day. Because then, most importantly, at the end of the day, you pick up the card again. A few more moments to read it. But this time we're reflecting upon the times when we demonstrated those behaviours during that day. We're congratulating ourselves for the times that we did demonstrate the behaviours. But we're also being curious as to the times when we didn't demonstrate the behaviours. What we do is we continue doing this every day, every morning, every evening of every work day, until we reach the stage where there's no exceptions, when we demonstrated those behaviours all of the time. Then you can move on and select another 3 things. So that's the pick 3 method. Choose your focus. The more attention and energy we give to a problem, the more we strengthen the brain networks around the problem. We're naturally, as human beings, we're drawn towards thinking about the problem, wanting to explore the what's wrong rather than working towards a solution, because that's linked into being aware of the risk, that conscious kind of always assessing the risk, predicting the future. And it takes less cognitive effort to think about the problem, because we've already got roadmaps of previous problems that we can kind of draw upon those past experiences. So it takes less energy. Because when we think about solutions, we've got to create new neural networks, which takes more energy. Now, we know that the brain likes to conserve energy. So again, we will naturally migrate back towards the problem. Now, the choose your focus model, should I say, says there are 5 different ways we can think about a change when we're introducing, a new way of working, for example. So this model allows us to recognise which levels we're focusing on at any time, and provides us with an opportunity to actually shift our focus. So first of all, we've got the vision. What are we trying to achieve? The planning. How are we going to get there? The solution, if you like. The detail. What are we actually going to do? The actions and the behaviours. The problem. Self-explanatory. And the drama. What are the emotions and feelings building around the situation? Now, you just think about, your experiences of this. A problem occurs. We all start talking about it. The more we talk about it, the more the drama builds, the emotions build around that. And we're all the time being drawn back to that. But from a brain's perspective, it's going to be naturally supporting us to do that. What we as leaders need to do, we need to help people. We need to keep drawing them back to the vision, to the planning, and then eventually to the detail. So as a leader, we need to be thinking, first of all, about our own thinking. Where are you placing your focus? Are you focusing on the problem, paying too much attention to it rather than the solution? And then we need to focus on and be aware of, where are the team placing the focus? And again, take action to shift. And the last model is motivates change model. Again, this was one of Linda Ray's 2020 models that she came out with. And this really is a little bit like a checklist. And let's the brain loves a checklist. And motivation is such a complex process. There's so many different strategies and things that we can use to influence and both our own and others' motivation. So just quickly going through this kind of checklist for sustainable change. Match the language. Think about the language being used. Think back to that chapter 2, some of the examples we spoke about there. Observe the threat. Look for the signs of threat, people moving towards that protective mode. And how can you, using the SCARE or the SCARF model, how can you mitigate some of those threats? Be aware and test your assumptions. What assumptions are you making about what motivates other people? What assumptions are you making about cognitive biases that are at play? Try and give immediate rewards. When somebody feels a reward or experiences a reward, a psychological reward, it gives us a dose of dopamine. Now, dopamine is the brain's feel-good chemical. So think about, how can I build in this dosing of dopamine? What are the rewards that I can actually, how do I use this? Again, it goes back to the SCARE model, threat versus reward. How can I mitigate threat producing rewards? View mistakes positively, see them as opportunities for learning. That ties in very much with a growth mindset. Acknowledge progress, notice those small wins frequently, both your own and those of other people. Take action. It's the antidote to inaction. Just one small step in pursuit of a goal can give a real boost to your motivation. Pat yourself on the back, express appreciation, pat yourself on the back, and others, pat them on the back, thank people for their efforts. And lastly, those social incentives. Find ways to show how other people are contributing to the change. Because by showing how and what other people are doing will encourage others to do similar, or possibly even do better. So that's our 4 kind of change strategies, very much modern, based on evidence kind of neuroscience. And that very much brings us towards the end of today. I apologise that we have run over, but I hope that you found it kind of interesting. Thank you very much for joining me today. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or if you prefer to drop them in an email, my details are on screen.